Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our English Learning podcast. I'm Jennifer, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Elizabeth. How are you today, Elizabeth?
Hi, Jennifer. I'm doing well, thank you. Today's topic is one that impacts millions of workers around the world. Is there any reason to raise minimum wages? The debate over raising the minimum wage has been ongoing for years, with strong arguments on both sides. Some argue that increasing the minimum wage is essential for reducing poverty and improving workers' quality of life, while others believe it could lead to higher unemployment and inflation. Today, we'll break down the key points on both sides of this debate and try to answer the question, should we raise the minimum wage?
That's right, Elizabeth. The minimum wage is the lowest amount that employers are legally required to pay their workers, and in many countries, it hasn't kept up with the rising cost of living. For millions of low-wage workers, the current minimum wage isn't enough to cover basic needs like housing, food, and healthcare. But opponents of raising the minimum wage argue that it could hurt small businesses and lead to job losses. Today, we'll explore both the economic and ethical arguments surrounding this issue.
Exactly. And for our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you think raising the minimum wage is a good idea, or do you have concerns about the potential negative effects? Share your opinions with us, and we might even feature them in a future episode. So, Jennifer, let's start by discussing the arguments in favor of raising the minimum wage. What are some of the key reasons people believe we should increase it?
Well, Elizabeth, one of the main arguments in favor of raising the minimum wage is that it helps to reduce poverty and income inequality. Many people working minimum wage jobs are struggling to make ends meet, and a higher wage would give them the financial stability they need to cover basic expenses. For example, in countries where the minimum wage hasn't been raised in years, workers are finding it harder to afford things like rent, food, and healthcare. Supporters argue that increasing the minimum wage would lift millions of people out of poverty and help close the income gap between low-wage workers and higher earners.
That's such an important point, Jennifer. The idea of reducing poverty is at the heart of the argument for raising the minimum wage. In many places, the current minimum wage doesn't provide enough income to meet basic living standards. For example, in the United States, the federal minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 an hour since 2009, while the cost of living has continued to rise. Advocates for raising the minimum wage argue that workers deserve to be paid a living wage, one that reflects the true cost of living in today's economy.
Exactly, Elizabeth. Another argument in favor of raising the minimum wage is that it can help boost the economy by increasing consumer spending. When workers earn more, they have more money to spend on goods and services, which stimulates demand and helps businesses grow. This can create a positive cycle where higher wages lead to more spending, which in turn leads to more business activity and potentially even more job creation. Supporters argue that raising the minimum wage could be a win-win for both workers and businesses, as it puts more money into the economy.
Absolutely, Jennifer. The economic stimulus argument is a strong one. When low-wage workers have more disposable income, they're more likely to spend it on necessities like food, clothing, and housing, which can help boost local businesses. This increase in consumer spending can also lead to job growth, as businesses hire more workers to meet the demand. In this sense, raising the minimum wage is seen as a way to strengthen the economy from the bottom up, by putting more money into the hands of those who are most likely to spend it.
That's such a great point, Elizabeth. And beyond the economic benefits, raising the minimum wage is also seen as a matter of fairness and social justice. Supporters argue that it's simply not fair for people to work full-time and still live in poverty. Many minimum wage workers are employed in essential jobs, such as food service, retail, and healthcare, and they deserve to be paid enough to support themselves and their families. By raising the minimum wage, we're recognizing the value of their labor and ensuring that no one who works full-time has to struggle just to get by.
Exactly, Jennifer. The idea of dignity in work is another key argument for raising the minimum wage. Advocates argue that people deserve to be paid fairly for their work, and that paying workers a wage that keeps them in poverty is exploitative and unethical. Many people working minimum wage jobs are also supporting families, and raising the minimum wage would help ensure that they can provide for their children and improve their quality of life. It's about ensuring that workers are treated with respect and that they're able to live with dignity.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. So, from the perspective of those who support raising the minimum wage, the key arguments are that it helps reduce poverty and income inequality, boosts the economy by increasing consumer spending, and ensures fairness and dignity for workers. But, of course, not everyone agrees with this approach. Let's now talk about the arguments against raising the minimum wage. What are some of the concerns that people have?
Well, Jennifer, one of the main arguments against raising the minimum wage is the fear that it could lead to job losses. Critics argue that if businesses are forced to pay their workers more, they might respond by cutting jobs, reducing workers' hours, or automating certain tasks to save money. This is especially true for small businesses, which may not have the financial resources to absorb the higher labor costs. Opponents of raising the minimum wage believe that it could hurt the very people it's meant to help by making it harder for low-wage workers to find and keep jobs.
That's such an important point, Elizabeth. The concern about job losses is one of the most common arguments against raising the minimum wage. Small businesses, in particular, may struggle to pay higher wages, especially if they operate on thin profit margins. If the cost of labor increases significantly, some businesses may be forced to lay off workers or reduce their hours in order to stay afloat. This could lead to higher unemployment and make it even harder for low-wage workers to find steady employment.
Exactly, Jennifer. Another argument against raising the minimum wage is that it could lead to higher prices for consumers. Businesses that are forced to pay higher wages may pass those costs on to their customers in the form of higher prices for goods and services. This could lead to inflation, making everyday items more expensive for everyone, including low-wage workers themselves. Critics argue that while raising the minimum wage might help some workers, it could also contribute to a rise in the cost of living, which could offset the benefits of a higher wage.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. The concern about inflation is a significant one. If the cost of goods and services rises in response to higher wages, low-wage workers might find that their increased pay doesn't go as far as they had hoped. Critics argue that raising the minimum wage could create a cycle of inflation, where businesses raise prices, which then leads to calls for even higher wages and so on. In this view, raising the minimum wage could have unintended consequences that make it harder for everyone to afford basic necessities.
Exactly, Jennifer. And beyond the economic concerns, some opponents of raising the minimum wage argue that it could reduce incentives for businesses to invest in training and skill development for their workers. Businesses are required to pay higher wages, they might be less willing to invest in training programs or offer opportunities for advancement, which could make it harder for workers to gain the skills they need to move up the economic ladder. Critics argue that rather than focusing on raising the minimum wage, we should focus on creating opportunities for education and skills development that allow workers to earn higher wages through productivity and career growth.
That's such an important point, Elizabeth. The idea of incentivizing skill development is central to this argument. Critics argue that raising the minimum wage could discourage businesses from investing in their workers because they're already paying higher wages. Instead of encouraging businesses to invest in training and career development, a higher minimum wage might make it harder for workers to gain the skills they need to advance in their careers. In this view, the focus should be on job creation and skills development, rather than simply raising wages.
Absolutely, Jennifer. Another argument against raising the minimum wage is the concern that it could hurt young and inexperienced workers. For many young people, minimum wage jobs are a way to gain work experience and develop important job skills. Critics argue that if the minimum wage is raised too high, businesses may be less willing to hire inexperienced workers, making it harder for young people to enter the workforce. In this view, a higher minimum wage could actually reduce opportunities for the very people it's meant to help.
Exactly, Elizabeth. The idea that raising the minimum wage could reduce opportunities for entry-level workers is a significant concern. For many young people, their first job is a minimum wage position, and it's a stepping stone to gaining valuable work experience. If businesses are forced to pay higher wages, they may be more selective about who they hire, making it harder for young or inexperienced workers to get their foot in the door. Critics argue that this could have a long-term impact on career development and job opportunities for young people.
So, from the perspective of those who oppose raising the minimum wage, the key concerns are the potential for job losses, higher prices, reduced opportunities for skill development, and fewer jobs for young and inexperienced workers. As we can see, there are valid arguments on both sides of this debate.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. And speaking of different perspectives, I think it's a great time to hear from one of our listeners. Let's take a call from someone who might have an interesting perspective on whether we should raise the minimum wage. Hi there, you're on the air with Jennifer and Elizabeth. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Elizabeth. My name is Samantha, and I'm calling from New York City. I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, and I love today's topic. I wanted to share my thoughts because I work in a small business, and I've seen both the challenges and the potential benefits of raising the minimum wage.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you so much for calling in. We'd love to hear more about your experience working in a small business. What are your thoughts on raising the minimum wage? Do you think it's a good idea, or are you concerned about the impact it could have on businesses like yours?
Well, I think it's a complicated issue. On one hand, I understand the need to raise wages for workers who are struggling to make ends meet. It's hard to live on minimum wage, especially in a city like New York where the cost of living is so high. But on the other hand, I've seen how small businesses struggle to stay afloat, especially with rising rents and other costs. If the minimum wage is raised too high, I worry that some small businesses might have to close their doors or lay off workers to cover the higher labor costs.
That's such a valuable perspective, Samantha. It sounds like you understand both the need for higher wages and the challenges that small businesses face. Do you think there's a way to raise the minimum wage in a way that balances the needs of workers and businesses?
I think it's possible, but it would need to be done carefully. Maybe a gradual increase over time rather than a sudden jump. And I think there should be support for small businesses, like tax breaks or subsidies, to help them adjust to the higher wages. It's a tough balance, but I do think we can find a way to make it work for everyone.
That's such great insight, Samantha. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks for having me. I love listening to your podcast, and I'm excited to hear more episodes.
Thanks so much for calling in, Samantha. Take care.
Bye, Samantha.
That was a great call from Samantha. She really highlighted the challenges that small businesses face, while also acknowledging the need for higher wages for workers.
Absolutely, Jennifer. And for those of you listening, if you're enjoying our podcast, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support really helps us keep creating these episodes and sharing more interesting topics with you.
So, where does that leave us in our discussion today? I think it's clear that the question of whether to raise the minimum wage is a complex one, with strong arguments on both sides. On one hand, raising the minimum wage could help reduce poverty, boost consumer spending, and ensure fairness and dignity for workers. On the other hand, there are concerns about job losses, inflation, and the impact on small businesses and young workers.
Exactly, Jennifer. Key takeaway is that any decision to raise the minimum wage should take into account the economic realities of different regions and industries. A one-size-fits-all approach may not work, and it's important to consider the potential impacts on both workers and businesses. Finding a balance that promotes fair wages while supporting economic growth is essential.
We hope today's discussion has given you some new insights into the question of whether we should raise the minimum wage. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for listening. We're always here to share new insights and help you learn English while exploring important topics like this one. Keep listening, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye for now, everyone. And remember, whether it's wages, working conditions, or other labor issues, understanding both sides of the debate is key to finding fair and effective solutions.